is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today. I am Sean Murphy alongside one of the best podcasters, up and coming content creators, not only in the Pistons space, but just in the NBA as a whole. I mean, this guy is the co-host of the Pistons Pulse podcast with our guy Omari Sankofa. He also is the co-host of the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini, my guy, Bryce Simon, aka Motor City Hoops. Bryce, it's so good to be talking basketball with you again on this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Nah, thanks for inviting me. Thank you for the kind intro. It's way too much, but I do appreciate it. And like we were talking before, it's cool to see people who love hoops, love Pistons, but NBA in general. I love when we can collab. I love seeing people do big things. You're doing big things in the space as well. And so I'm excited to get into stuff here.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, no, it's crazy. I remember just like a year or two ago when we started, making content together when you were in the middle of your classroom on a lunch break, in the very beginnings of
Yes.
it. And
Yes.
I was on a lunch break during my job too. And now, like we're in a space where we've both been able to cover, games in person this year. You're
Yeah.
working with Sam Vecini, who's like one of the best reporters, in the game, in my opinion. I mean, his mind is just insane. So just the fact that he asked you to be his co-host, dude, that just speaks worlds to, who you are and, what you bring to the table. So, just incredibly, I was just telling you this beforehand too, just been super fun to watch the ride that you've been on, man. And I'm incredibly proud of you. And just, again, just grateful to, be able to still talk hoops with you and kick it back like the old times, my friend.
It's funny you bring that up, man, because I kind of forgot. But yes, it was, if I remember right, it was a sporadic, like trying to make it work.
Yeah.
And I record at home now because the internet's good enough. That's how
Yep.
far I've come. Like
Yep.
that's the biggest jump I've made is the internet and connection at my house. But I think there was like a firewall on the
Yep.
school's internet. And so it took me longer to get in. And it was a disaster. We had to like rush it into like 10 minutes. And
Hey, we still made it work though, Bryce.
yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I was just like, man, the dedication right on his luck. Because when you're a teacher, you do not get a very long window to have a breather. So respects to you. But no, it's now we get a little more time. You're in the comfort of your home, and we get to talk about a way more fun Pistons team. Clearly,
Yeah.
this really fun season. No, Bryce, 3-35.
Whew.
I mean, I think you and I, if I had to say like where we ranked before the season, I would say you and I were more of the optimistic side of where we thought this team could go this season. I don't think any of the pessimists thought that 3-35 was going to be a possibility with where we're at, with the talent that's on the roster, with the coaching addition that was made in the offseason, and just overall where we're at in the stage of the rebuild. I asked him. I actually recorded with Omari as of this yesterday, so this is really cool. I get to do the Pistons Pulse experience back to back. This is
Well, we
awesome.
appreciate it.
I asked Omari this question, and I kind of want to ask you the same thing. If you had to describe this season in 3 words or less, what would you say and why?
Oh,
The word that comes to mind for me is just puzzling. Omari said flat out disaster is 3 words. 2 words, flat disaster, and 1 word, disaster.
the word that came to mind was, or I guess 2 were completely disjointed.
Yeah.
Like it's just I've said this on the pod over there in terms of I worry about there being one singular plan. And Tom Gores came out and said, no, we're all on the same plan. And so maybe I'm wrong here. I'm sitting in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. I don't have any intel. Like you're breaking news way more than I am. So shout out you. Like you're way more connected than I am. It's just,
stop it.
It just seems like I think Jay Nivey is the one that really hits home with me because it's like they took this dude number 5. And the more I'm not saying Monty's wrong here. I'm a huge Ivy fan, but it doesn't seem like Monty sees Jaden as that type of player. And it just sometimes this happens when you bring in a new coach, right, Sean? Like,
yeah,
Monty wasn't here coaching when Troy Weaver made all these draft picks. So maybe it's going to take some recalibration. I also have to say real quick, every time you say 3-35, my heart kind of drops because it's one thing to know they've lost so much. It's another thing to hear people talk about it. And I got to tell you, came back from Christmas break and my students are cooking me about how bad the Pistons are. And it's like, what do I say back? I have
Yeah.
no rebuttal whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
No, it's like
it's been rough.
at a certain point, obviously, like last year, you understand the losing to a certain extent
Yeah,
because you're going for, that generational prospect, which, I think if there was anything that just kind of made like the salt in the wound just a little bit worse, I think not only was it the loss to the team that also only has about 5 wins on the season, but on top of that, to see, front and center, exactly why Victor Wembanyama was the prospect that he was, and also just to see in full scale why the Pistons falling in the lottery was as devastating as it was. And this is something that I don't hear people talk about enough, Bryce. People don't realize it wasn't just the worst fall in draft lottery history, just from the sense of like the prospect that was available.
sure,
It,
sure.
it
Yeah,
was it was quite literally the worst drop in NBA draft history, because before this point, the worst you could fall if you had the best odds was the 3rd overall pick. No team with the best odds has ever fallen below that until the Detroit Pistons in this past draft, when they had the worst odds, when they changed the rules a couple of years ago to punish tanking. Funny enough, it's the team that refused to tank until now, the Pistons, that bit that bullet. And it's
well,
like people don't realize like just how devastating that can really be. And I think we're watching that play out. As good as Assar is, don't get me wrong.
no, I think that's really interesting perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way, Sean. Of okay, yeah, they fell from 1 to 5. That really stinks. But under the current odds, it's still a 48% chance to be the 5th pick whenever you have the worst record. We're going to go through this whole thing yet again,
Yeah.
but it's not going to seem as bad, Sean. Let's say the Pistons end up with the worst record in the NBA, right? Very plausible right now.
I think that yeah, let's say, Bryce.
If they fall to number 5 in this draft, it will not feel nearly as bad as it did in that draft. And listen, I've
Right.
really come around on a guy, Alex Sarr. I think he's really good. There's some guys will eventually separate themselves.
Mhm.
Nowhere near. I mean, you talked about Sam Vecini, right? One of the
Yeah.
best there is. He created an own. Victor had his own tier for Sam Vecini.
Yeah.
Like, and he does it every year. The tier 1 means the same thing every year. Tier 2 means the same thing. Victor had his own tier. We throw around the term generational prospect too much. Victor was a generational prospect. That doesn't mean he was automatically a generational player. He was a generational prospect. Scoot
Yeah.
Henderson was not. I said that a lot leading up to the draft. Scoot was good. Scoot was not generational. So that's great perspective from you in terms of it's not just the fall from 1 to 5, it's the fall in the difference between Victor Wembanyama and again, a very talented but going to take a little while, Assar Thompson.
Yeah, it's like it's the difference between getting a guy that can be talked about in the reverence of, people talked about him in the reverence of like a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
Yeah.
which is not a name that gets thrown around with prospects at all. And in comparison to getting a guy that could potentially be like a Paul George, which don't get me wrong, getting a Paul George is a great scenario in just about any draft. But I mean, Paul George has come around way more often than the Kareems, the Victors, and again, not saying that's what it takes to win championships. There's more parity in the league now today than there ever has been. But again, I think just I guess didn't realize, maybe just realizing now just how much that can really take effect, and maybe some of that playing into the scale of what this season has been.
Well, the other thing is think about the comps, right? Like for Victor, it's generational prospect.
Yeah.
For Assar, what we all fell into was Andre Iguodala. That
Yep.
was the comp that a lot. Andre Iguodala contributed to winning at a very, very high level, right? We would
Yep.
all agree with that. That's
Mhm.
not a knock on Assar. But who did he win those championships with? Generational talent in Steph Curry,
Right.
one of the best shooters of all time in Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, while a unique talent, a very talented, skilled,
Right.
unique talent.
And he won Finals MVP. He's
He
he's
did.
been the plus he's been the best player on the court before, but he's never been the best player on your team.
Yeah, and so that's the difference in what we're talking about here. Now, I want to be real clear because I can hear people screaming. This is no excuse for what this season is. I think
Oh,
you and
not at
I are,
all.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
at all.
You and I are just riffing on something that I think was a really good point by you. And listen, I said in Denver a few weeks ago with the beat writers, pregame, all of that, and we had this conversation. Like, man, I wonder what would have happened if what would this team look like if Victor was on it? So everybody's having these conversations. It's not
Right.
a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just interesting to think about.
Right, exactly. It's something that quite frankly I just, I haven't had much interest in thinking about just because, ultimately it is just about, you can't change what's happened in the past. You can only focus on what you can do in the future. But in the same light, it's just, that for Victor to get his first triple double in that light, for the game to end the way that it did, for the, teams to be in the positions that they're in, it's just one of those points where you can't help but take a pause and think about, man, what if the scripts were flipped? But Bryce, nonetheless, they are, like you said, they are where they are now. There's no excuses for it. There were opportunities, and I mean, if you look at the win percentage of where this team is, compared to historically, they're being talked about, like the 2010 Cavs, the year after LeBron left for Miami. They're being talked about like the Charlotte Bobcats in the lockout year, and if you look, unfortunately at their record over the last year or so, since the trade deadline when they moved Sadiq Bey and acquired on James Wiseman, their win percentage is worse than those teams. And if you look at if you look just on paper from a talent perspective, maybe we're a little too close to it and see these players, all the time and like what their upsides can be. But from a on paper standpoint, there's no reason from a talent perspective that this team should be near those teams. Like, yeah, like those, like the Cavaliers team. Obviously, we all know why that team was a disaster. The Bobcats, they had like Kemba, but that was his rookie year, and he was asked to be in a position to play hero ball with a ton of absolute, just not NBA players, to put it nicely. How is it that this team with this collection, I mean, you said disjointed, I talked more, like big picture stuff and like kind of the vibes around the, team and potential front office stuff with Omari yesterday. From a basketball perspective, like watching on the court, like why is this just not clicking? Is it just the lack of shooting? Is it just the lack of clarity in roles? Is it just like, what do you think I mean, it's a mixture of things, but what stands out to you?
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out is if you go to Basketball Reference, they have a thing called Pythagorean wins, and
Yep.
it's a formulation to see how many wins a team should have based on points scored, points given up, and it says they should have 8 wins. Now, I also subscribe to you are what your record says you are. So I'm
Yeah.
not like I don't want to use this data and a formula that I don't even fully understand to say, well, they've been unlucky. That's not what I'm saying. And even 8 wins isn't, respectable. I do think there's a little bit of like there's some games they could have won, should have won, whatever, and just flat out didn't.
Yep.
Even early in the season, they played some teams that they had a chance, they were up on, weren't able to close it out. Maybe somebody came into town, rested some guys, all of that stuff. On top of no Boyan, we haven't seen Monte Morris yet. Duran has missed a lot more time than I think what even I've realized at times whenever I look through the stats. Jaden
Almost like a
Ivey,
half of the season.
yeah. That's Jaden Ivey, is coming off the bench and all of those things. So when we projected what this team could be, you go Cade Cunningham healthy, Jaden Ivey in year 2, building off what he did as a rookie, Boyan hopefully doing what he did last year, Duran taking a step forward. And then you went to the depth, Sean, and you said, Monte Morris is a really good second unit point guard. Maybe Joe Harris can come in and just knock down some shots if a team goes zone. Like none of this stuff has happened.
Yeah.
The other thing, they don't win on the margins in terms of they're like the worst 3-point shooting team in the league in terms of attempts. It's not something they value. They foul a ton, they turn it over a ton, and they don't force turnovers. So they
Even
don't,
when they get to the line, they miss a lot of free throw shots.
yeah. So some of those things that stand out, they're middle of the pack, but a lot of the things that you're like, if you were a top 10 3-point shooting team, how many more wins do they have, right? Like maybe even if the defense isn't as good or something, they don't win in any of those scenarios. They're actually really bad in a lot of them. And so, listen, I don't know. Maybe this is the right vision from Monty. It's too early for me to put any overwhelming judgments. This was
Right.
a long haul thing, and he knows more about basketball than me. but it's been rough. Like this path has been rough. And, I could go into the defensive stuff as well.
Yeah.
They communicate horribly off the ball, Sean. It's unbelievable how
Oh my
bad the
goodness. I that's to me, that's like one of the biggest pet peeves and like the if you look at the constants of, this team just about every game, it's a lot of, like I have my volume up. I listen intentionally for like communication. It just about never feels like I just about never hear any. And it's a lot of guys that are just looking at each other confused at the end of plays, guys shrugging their shoulders, looking at the refs, like what? Like, just catching them in these situations where they're like, what happened? And it's like, you get the sense that guys like, Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart, like I know they're naturally just not the most talkative guys in person anyway. And like like that's understandable. You don't have to be, but like in the same light, like when you're like, especially when you're talking about like how to play like good defense, it starts with team defense and communication and those basic things. Like that's something you can control. And
you You
yeah,
bring up you can watch it after a lot of plays, Sean.
yep,
Watch guys' reactions. That's how you know when a mistake was made, is when a guy watch a bucket get scored, and instead of watching the ball or the offense, watch the guy that just got scored on, and you can tell really quick whether he made a mistake, was expecting help, was
yep,
expecting a switch. He'll throw his hands up, or he'll like put his one hand up saying like my bad, or he'll look at a teammate going, you were supposed to be there, my guy, and you weren't there. The
yeah,
ball screen defense is just as bad. And I tweeted this out the other day. From my perspective, everybody's to blame. Listen,
yep,
I could go all day about where I think Jalen Duren needs to get better defensively, especially in ball screen defense, but his guards don't necessarily navigate screens real well. And the other three guys not involved aren't always as active and engaged helping in those situations either. And
yeah,
I can't help but wonder, would this defense be better if Dan Burke had been here all season? I have no idea what's going on with him off the court. I hope everything's good.
right.
And obviously, he's not coming back this year because they replaced that position. I was really excited about that move, Sean. You talk about
Yeah.
all the different players, Monty. I was excited about an assistant coach who has the reputation in the NBA for defense specifically. And him not being here, I kind of wonder, like, is that have the defense swimming a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is interesting, like, you do talk about, like, like with Monty and, like what his role is and everything. And, your co-host Sam Vecini, he's probably like one of the, like first, national voices that was publicly critical of like Monty's coaching performance and talking about the, impact on wins and losses. And, it's like I don't subscribe to the I know people are saying, "Oh, Monty's washed or he's a bad coach," and things like that. I just don't subscribe to that theory. I don't think you can have the success that he's had in Phoenix and other stops in his career and then just suddenly forget how to coach. But in the same light, you can also look and question, retrospectively, was he the right coach for this team at the right
Sure.
time? And, there's, kind of been the line of were they just trying to win the press conference, and, it is interesting. Like you talk about like the disjointedness. I kind of thought, just from the outside looking in, it seemed like him and Troy had like a really, strong relationship or, talked about like the friendship and the connection that they had. It's been interesting to see just kind of the disjointedness from the coaching staff to the front office, like with, specifically a guy like Jaden Ivey, which, granted, now that he has had more time, like in his last, like I'd say like 11, 12, like 13 games, he's been, getting more like 29, 30 minutes. So,
Yeah.
definitely getting a better role now. But for a solid stretch of the season, he was seventh in minutes in the rotation. And, just definitely can cause a lot of, weird vibes and discouragement and mess with the player's development.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point in terms of saying that maybe Monty isn't the right coach for this team, which I still think it's too early. I know people don't want
Yeah.
to hear that. I want everybody to understand.
I
I get the frustration, Sean. I get people calling for Troy Weaver's job. I get
Yep.
people calling for Monty Williams' job. I
And
get
I wanna be
people.
clear, I'm not calling I don't believe in calling for people's
Yeah,
jobs, it's
yeah.
just not who I am, and I still have a lot of respect for Monty Williams as a coach and as a person, but I understand why the conversations are being had.
Exactly. And that's where I'm at as well. I'm not ready to that. I think we answered the question specifically on should Troy Weaver make it past the deadline. And I said, I don't want to call that. I just think there needs to be some sort of shakeup in the front office, and maybe it was just a reorganization on who makes the decisions, who has the biggest voice. I do think Troy Weaver. If I was Tom Gores, I would want to see the plan outlined. I think what I would want, what as a fan, here's the answer I would want. Like, I don't deserve this. As a fan, I don't really think that. I don't think it has to play out in the media. But if I could ask one question, it would be, what have we learned from this past offseason?
Right.
Troy Weaver, what have you learned from the past offseason? And how would you do it different, or how will you do it different now? Because here's what I think we lose track of a little bit. Everybody goes, it's year 4 of the rebuild. They should be good. Yes, it was 3 years of truly just breaking it down, though. And we
Yes.
lost 1 year of Cade Cunningham. To me, how we have to look at this is in the context of, this is the first year where I truly think they wanted to be good. And that's why it's so frustrating, Sean, because it's
Yep.
an epic failure. It's not a little failure, it's an epic failure. And
This was
so,
a year of progression, and
yes,
rather it's been regression.
exactly. And that's why it's important, because they're not tanking. There is nobody in this draft to tank for, as we outlined earlier. So if I had one question I could ask Troy Weaver, the front office, Tom, whoever, I would want to go, what did you learn from the plan this past offseason? What was the miscalculation? What did you learn from it? And then how can you learn and grow from it moving forward? And if I like that answer, then I would feel very comfortable with the front office moving forward, because I think that's what has to happen.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes. We all grow and learn, right? This is Troy Weaver's first time as the man in charge, building out a competitive team. He
Yep.
broke it down. Now he's trying to build it back up. I don't want to just cut his legs out after one opportunity at that, but I want to know what he learned and how he's going to grow from it moving forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think we're going to learn a lot about Troy Weaver's ability to, of his ability to build a team, and, how he can, turn, turn these, like turn chicken to chicken salad, for a lack of better terms. And it's going to be interesting because, with the deadline coming up, obviously in a few weeks time now, over the last week, it seems like the floodgates, so to speak, have opened as far as rumors of players available, teams getting interested in making trades. I think, obviously, I understand the impatience of fans of why haven't changes been made, why haven't trades been, been happening yet. But as you know, Bryce, like, it takes two to tango in this league, and especially like this time of year is really where I think teams are starting to come to grips with who we are,
Sure.
where we need to go, like what direction we need to take. And it seems like teams like Atlanta are really ready to start tearing things down. It seems, everything I've pretty much heard that it's, anyone not named Bogdanovich or Johnson is available for trade on that team. The Nets, it seems like they're ready to finally start moving in a direction and in repiecing around Mikal Bridges. The Warriors, it sounds like anyone not named Steph Curry is available for trade. Andrew Wiggins is apparently pieced to Indiana. I saw that earlier. That could be interesting, but that's a conversation for a different time. What, like when you look around the league, like are you worried about the, like the type of swing that the Pistons can make, in the sense of, could they maybe make too much of a panic move, give up a little too much of the young core that they have? Because, not saying that, of course this team needs to get better and they need to make a move to, bring in significant talent, but in the same light, could this be almost like a worse version of a Blake Griffin trade, where ultimately you give up a really tantalizing young player in return that could ultimately come back and haunt you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am more in line with keeping the young core. And the problem is, those are your only real assets, right? I mean, Boyan is an asset because of his contract and because he can still play, but what are you getting in return? And the thing is, you have to replace his production. That's the thing about getting rid of Boyan, is we've seen how the offense, at least not the defense, but how the offense looks better with him on the floor. Well, if you're going to trade him, I would be interested. Can they turn Boyan into a younger, maybe not as talented offensively, but a little more defense? Or can they turn him
Yeah.
into that type of player, right? I
Mhm.
think what I would like them to look for is maybe that youngerish player who has proven a little bit, but isn't getting the opportunity.
So
And that
Jonathan Kuminga.
so I like John. No, 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 for sure. That's a name. I've kind of grown a little bit more into Moses Moody because I
Yes.
think
Yep.
Moses has I think his cost would be even less because he hasn't even got the amount of opportunity that Kaminga has. And so,
Right.
and I don't think these guys are the James Wisemans and like those risks that we've taken in the past. Like these guys have shown that they can be, and to Wiseman's credit, he's played well recently, to be honest with you. Like
Yeah.
I still feel bad for Marvin back. That's a whole nother conversation. Anyway, so
Yeah.
Moody and Kaminga are both guys that definitely have stood out to me. Someone like Lauri Markkanen is a name I always bring up, but it doesn't sound like the Jazz are really going to move him. And the reason I say Lauri is I think he fits the timeline. He still has a really nice year on his contract before you have to pay him big. And so something like that, even though I don't know if they should be buyers that big, but you got to
Right.
start building this out at some point, Sean. Like everybody
Yeah.
says, no reason for the Pistons to make a move. Cade's going into year 4 all of a sudden next year. So I'm okay if you take the move now instead of the offseason if this is the right time to do it.
Well, and it's and even just getting, like reliable veterans who can come in and contribute, who can play on the wing, who can, I even bring up guys, like a TJ McConnell from Indiana, that type of player who comes in, like when I watch, like a lot of other young teams in the league, like the teams that are taking the leap that we thought the Pistons would take. I mean, obviously Orlando's taking it to a whole different scale. But even like Houston and Indiana who's taken next steps, like a lot of those teams, they have players who they can bring into the game, who are spark plugs, who can cause problems on the defensive end, that can get turnovers, that can hit an occasional shot. Like it doesn't feel like the Pistons have that pest on the defensive end that can really help and like establish that identity for them. Like they have good defenders, they have players who can play solid defense, but they don't have guys who come in and set that tone for them.
Yeah. No, I think, and that's where it's going to be interesting again, because I know I just brought up Lowry. The only way you get Lowry is trading out on the young core. I don't want to
Yep.
like the only thing that I would understand is you're about to have another top 5 pick, as we talked about at the top. That's a lot of guys to develop and get minutes. So, I mean, I don't want to trade J.I. I'm the biggest J.I. fan I think there is right now. Like I have all of my Jaden Ivey stock, and I'll take anybody else's who wants to sell it to me. I think he's really good at basketball. You
Absolutely.
know, Assar, Duran, obviously Cade. You're going to add another top 5 pick to that. You have Marcus Sasser, who you want to get minutes. At a certain point, is like, would it actually be okay to trade a young asset because we still have plenty of other young players on the roster? Like it's okay. It's not like we're going to be void of young players with potential and all of that. The other thing you could do, Sean, this has been talked about a lot, is the Pistons are in a tough situation with trading future first round picks because of the
Yep.
one owed to the Knicks. Well, if you wait until after the draft, you could then trade essentially the 2024 draft pick. And so maybe you wait until the offseason to make a move that helps grow the roster just a little bit. So
Right.
I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know which way they should go. I don't know which way they will go. I do think it seems a little early to like really go for it, but I don't hate the idea of getting Cade Cunningham some help, man.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, they're not in a position to go all in, push their chips in the middle of the table. We're competing for everything right now. But like, if they can at the very least just get a roster that can help them compete, that can, that can actually put, guys like Cade and Ivy in a position to succeed, and guys like Asar as well. Because I
Yeah.
think if you're looking at any player that may be struggling, the most right now with the way the roster is currently constructed, I think it is a guy like Assar Thompson. Obviously before Bojan was back, he was in the starting lineup more. He wasn't really didn't have a ton of actual game footage in the NBA for teams to scout. He was able to really come in and succeed. Now that teams are starting to really really give him room on the 3-point line, and he are starting to bait him into fouls and getting him in a more difficult position. Obviously, I think he's really struggled, and I kind of am curious. How much do you think is it like a rookie wall? How much do you think is like just the current circumstance of where this team is at, and how much do you think is maybe something to actually be concerned about?
Yeah, so I want to say, and this plays right into Assar, is I think to put a cap on what I'd like to see is I want to see these guys in the roles they need to be in.
Yes.
Right now everybody's scale. Even Boyan is playing a role offensively that he probably is too old to be playing right now, Sean. And that's why I vision him getting traded at the deadline,
Yep.
going to a team being the sixth man, and we're watching him in the playoffs play really good defense, and like we're all throwing our arms up like, where was this in Detroit? Well, in Detroit, he was having to take this crazy offensive load
He's
in
like our
minutes.
number 2, number 3 option.
Yeah, and so everybody, Isaiah Stewart takes a lot of heat from the fan base, and to me, it's because he's being asked to do more than what he's really ready to do or capable of doing. If Isaiah Stewart was the third big on this team, I really feel like the fan base would love him as this dude that comes off the bench. Oh, he's making shots at 40% from three, rebounding, tough guy. But since he's the starting four man, that's not good enough. And it's not good enough for a starting four man. So that's the same thing with Assar. As you said, Assar was second on the team in field goal attempts until Boyan came back, Sean.
Yep.
That is not Assar Thompson. That
Not at
wasn't
all.
in the scouting report. I don't know if Assar should ever be the second on a team in field goal attempts. That's not Andre Iguodala that we said was his comp
Yeah.
earlier in the episode. So he was asked to do more than what he probably should have. I do wonder if there's a little bit of a rookie wall. Just it happens for a lot of
Yeah.
rookies, right? And coming from where he came from with the OTE, those games weren't crazy competitive and physical and all those all the time. Like this has to be a lot. I think he'll be okay with that. I have a little bit, just a little. I'm not like freaking out. I have a little bit of concern with the overall offensive game. Like
Right.
just the handle's loose. The shot looks a little worse than even what I thought. And I thought it was going to be bad, but it's been even a little worse than I thought. And the finishing around the rim in the half court that aren't just dunks is a question mark. And that was a question mark coming into the draft as well. So
Right.
nothing new that's popped up. That's okay. Just a little bit defensively. I love him. Rebounding, steals, all of that stuff. Love him. I want to see some growth, and it may not be till next year. So we won't have this answer for a while, but I'm
Mhm.
not like freaking out about any of the offensive stuff right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, ultimately, when he comes in with so many skill sets that, quite frankly, like you can't teach,
Yeah.
and are a premium in this league, it makes you more patient on those other things. And I've seen a lot of people throw comparisons Asar's way. I've seen like the image of side by side of him and Stanley
Yeah, I
Johnson,
saw
and
that
it's
the other
just
day too.
and I just absolutely hate that comparison just because, if you look at like, first of all, like who they are, I mean, like maybe who they are as like players, as prospects, like on paper, I guess that makes sense. But if you look at who they are as people and like what they're interested in, like Assar just lives and breathes basketball. Like I was at the open practice earlier in the season, and I just remember being in the media room. Someone asked him what the biggest adjustment for him off the court has been in the NBA so far. That he literally was like, off the court? Like he couldn't conceptualize not being on a basketball court, Bryce. That's just who he is.
Yeah, no,
Right.
and listen, all the intel, and last year was my first year really doing the draft in general. And so my connections, my relationships weren't crazy strong. But I talked to people like the intel was really good on both of those kids,
Yeah.
Amin and Assar, in terms of who they were as people, how hard they would work, the roles that they would be willing to accept, how much about basketball they were, all of those things. And we've seen nothing but that play out
Yep.
during his rookie season. And so, yeah, like those are the kids you want to bet. I keep calling them kids. It's so that those
They
are the
they
type.
are kids though,
Yeah,
like, especially when you're in our position, like, and I get it, like, I also used to, like, you work with kids, I used to work with kids as well, so, like, no matter what, they're in that age, they're kids, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. He, I'm gonna bet on a player like that. Like I'm
Yeah.
gonna bet that he figures it out. Maybe it's not. Maybe he doesn't hit Andre Iguodala. Maybe the offensive game is always a little bit concerned. Maybe he ends up being like the seventh man off the bench who comes in as a defensive stopper, changes the speed of the game, gets going. Like what you were just talking about, a guy that's just a pest defensively and all of that. You know what? that's still a really valuable player. And
Yep.
even at number 5, maybe you want, like, I'm sure there's somebody that drafted behind him that's going to end up being better if that's is the end result, but it's still okay. And so we got to be patient with it. I got to remind myself to be patient with it.
Yep.
But we did see the first part of the season where he was really good, and it's changed so much since then. I don't want us to forget that part though.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Bryce, my last question for you. Who has been outside of the Pistons? Because obviously we could talk all day about that team and,
Oh, this is going to be an easy answer.
oh,
I think I know the question. This is going to be an easy answer.
I was going to ask you, what have been your league pass leisure teams? What have
Oh,
been the
yeah.
best? What have been the teams that you have enjoyed watching the most this season?
Oklahoma City Thunder. It's not even
Oh my
close.
gosh.
It's
Oh
not even.
my gosh.
Here's the thing. It is
Br-
beautiful basketball. It is beautiful basketball. I love SGA. And this is nothing against the highlight reel guys, Sean. This is nothing against crazy explosive athletes, nothing. SGA just does it so eloquently.
He's methodical.
Yes,
He's so consistent. He picks you apart in just about every position, in just about in every way possible. And the thing is like you said, like, nothing against highlight reel players. He's a guy that can be a highlight reel player.
sure.
He has the athleticism too. Like, like I remember watching Oklahoma City versus Boston, just multiple
Yeah.
plays, him driving past Drew Holiday, which is, I'm like, do you know how hard that is to do? Like,
So here's the thing from that game. This is how good Oklahoma City is. Derek White is an all NBA level defender,
incredible.
maybe the best guard defender in the league, if not one of the, or definitely
Yep.
one of the, if not the. First 3 possessions of that game, SGA scores on Derek White. Jalen Williams gets Derek White, gets to the rim and scores. And then guess who scores the next possession on Derek White? Chet Holmgren. Like those. And again, this is not a knock on Derek White. This isn't me trying to say he's overrated. This is me saying those 3 dudes are really, really good. Chet is awesome.
Bryce, I remember when you and I were making content together back in the day, it was around the 2022 draft lottery when we were talking about guys like Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith Jr., Jaden Ivey, that entire prospect pool. And I remember just, I just remember you and I just oozing and raving about, Chet Holmgren. And a lot of people were skeptics, man. But I even myself, who was the biggest better on this guy's upside, even I'm just blown away by offensively what
Yes.
he's been doing this season, because he's looking like the apex of what I think people projected him to
Agreed.
be offensively right now.
Yeah. With amazing defense as well. I think the thing that I didn't project very well with him is, for whatever reason, his slight frame holds up practically on an NBA floor. I use this comparison a lot. Watch when James Wiseman plays with verticality at the rim. For whatever reason, his core strength or something, he'll get folded, like he'll bend at the waist when he takes contact in his core area. Chet Holmgren does not. Chet is able to hold that,
He's
and
tough.
he's so tough. And here's, me and Sam talked about them on our most recent pod. He especially, but even SGA and Jalen Williams, they have an attitude and a confidence and a swagger. Like Chet has some FU in him where it's just like, I'm going to go at you, and real ultimate confidence. I worry a little bit. I'm interested to see the rest of that starting lineup, Giddey and Dort, in the playoffs. I also just love Isaiah Joe. Isaiah Joe is one of my favorite players in the NBA off the bench. And they're just so much fun to watch. The way they play offense, the ball moves, dribble, pass, shoot, all of that stuff. It's beautiful basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, oh my goodness, I could go all day on that team and talk about an interesting storyline at the deadline. But Bryce, this was so fun, man. I could literally talk hours. I could record for hours with you, man. It's always a pleasure and a blast. Thank you so much again for hopping on. And seriously, dude, congratulations on everything that you're doing. Keep killing it. And please, people go find you on Pistons Pulse podcast, Game Theory with Sam Facini, at Motor City Hoops on Twitter. Anywhere else people can find you, Bryce?
No, that's it. Just the pods and Twitter. And I want to say this is my fault. This isn't longer. So I want everybody to blame me. I would love.
No.
Yes. I would. Yeah, boo me.
No,
I would,
dude, you are an insanely busy man. So the fact that you make time and just are who you are, man, I appreciate it a ton.
Well, legit, here's what sucks though. The only reason I have to leave is because I have my car getting an oil change and it closes in 15 minutes and I have to go down and pay for it and pick it up before it closes, or we could go another 45 minutes till my kids practice. So this is my fault.
Hey,
I apologize.
Hey,
when
Bryce,
I come on next time, we'll double it.
Oh, absolutely. We definitely got to do it again soon, man. This was a blast. Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely.
What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. I am one of your hosts, Sean Murphy, alongside the man, the myth, the Marquette Heat, joining us from that beautiful seat, blending in with the wall behind him, Troy Sergey. Troy, it's good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you too, Sean. And hey, like you mentioned before we went live here, or hit record at least, the Pistons have doubled their win total since the end of December.
They have. I mean, people said this team was on the way down, but I mean, they have doubled their win total. That is not easy to do.
Not many teams can say that.
It is when you only had 2 wins going into the end of December.
Yeah.
But Troy, not only did the Pistons win a basketball game, they started what appears to be a series of moves, and the change that the Pistons have signaled for it feels like is finally on the way. So we will talk about that and some of the other things going on in the world of the Pistons and more. But first, this is From Half Court, where each and every week we talk all things Detroit Pistons, all things NBA basketball, all things chaos. If you like that, be sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that mother notification bell so you don't miss any of the content coming from this channel. But also be sure you follow us on social media so you don't miss any of our opinions, takes, or anything else we have going on. You can follow myself on X and even on Threads if that's something you desire as well, at Sean Halfcourt. You can also follow Troy on X at Troy Sergey 44. You threads in it yet, Troy, or are you?
I'm not threading it yet. I'll wait till the next decade to thread it.
Yeah, that's fair. Things generally hit Marquette like a decade later, so I think that only is appropriate. You guys just got Lil Wayne last week, right?
Yeah. And then we got Eminem the week before that. So,
oh man, it's been a good couple of weeks for you guys. You're discovering a lot up there. No, but in all seriousness, Troy, you've been able to go to quite a few Pacers games of late. Any games in particular that stood out you got to attend? And real quick before we get into Pistons and all that, like what's the Pacers pulse? Obviously, Tyrese Halliburton down to injury is really tough.
Yeah. No, I was at that game, Sean. I was at the game where Tyrese went down, and you could hear a pin drop there, and 20,000 plus fans. So that was definitely a blow to the Pacers, but I think they've been winning games, Sean. I mean, what have they won? Really, was it not 9 of the last 11? Is that about right? I think they were on a 6-game winning streak, and then they lost, and they were on a 3-game winning streak, and then they lost. So I think that definitely the tables are turning in Indiana. I think this team really has potential to be a top 5 team in the East, if not that 5th seed itself. So I think, once they get Tyrese back, I think they'll be good. But that game in particular, I think when Tyrese went down and the Celtics went on a big run and they were up by, I think, 8 points in the 3rd quarter. And it was like, all right, no Tyrese, this is going to be an L. And then the boys like Benedict Mathurin and TJ McConnell and Aaron Nesmith, took the team back. And Toston was without Tatum, but Jaylen Brown dropped a 40-piece. So whenever he can do that, I think it's that helps that team better. When Boston knows that they have Tatum and Brown able to score at will, I think that's only going to help them even in the playoff runs when they need a bucket. They know that they have 2 guys who can get them one. So that game in particular stood out. Then I went to there was a blowout win against the Hawks. Trae Young and DeJounte Murray didn't really even play the 4th quarter. And then they lost to the Celtics that Saturday night. That was a national TV game, I think.
Yep.
Which was always fun. And bumped into one of our college buddies. Shout out to Chris Noblet. He's been on the pod before.
Nobzilla?
Knobzilla. He was standing in front of me in line, and I was like, I think I know you.
A former co-host of the podcast,
Yeah,
Knobzilla.
yeah. We love Knobzilla.
Oh
So
yeah,
shout out to him.
100%.
And shout out to his team. He's a high school girls coach, and they played at the field house after the Pacers, and they won.
Oh, really?
He said it was crazy playing in an NBA arena at 11 p.m., but they did, and they won.
They got to play at like 11. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely love to hear that. Shout out to Chris. That is so cool.
Yes.
That's why he's not in the pod, by the way, is because he's coaching actual basketball.
That's right. That's right.
But Troy, we might not be coaching, but we sure are here chirping about it.
We're here chirping. We're watching. We're analyzing, right, Sean?
Yeah,
That's the best word, analyzing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're analyzing that so good. And Troy, speaking of so good, the Pistons have been not that. And, obviously we all know that up to this point. But the most interesting things that came out of this weekend, one being the trade that they have made, ultimately shipping Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Livers to the Washington Wizards in exchange for Danilo Gallinari. As well, Detroit sending multiple second round picks to the Wizards as well. And also in the exchange, also getting, I am forgetting his name. This shows how great of an analyst I really am. They also got a big man from the Wizards.
Mike. They got Big Mike.
Yep, big Mike. It's gonna bother me until I find it. But Troy, what were your initial thoughts when you saw the trade? What thoughts come to mind now? And ultimately, do you expect this to be the first to come of a series of moves?
Mm-hmm. Well, the kid in me, I guess, when you hear the word trade, you think, okay, who did we give away, and who did we get in return? But these days, when there's the free agent market the way that it is, and cap space being as important it is for franchises, that really wasn't the concern with this one.
Mike Muscala, by the way.
Mike Muscala, yeah. So really to get those two guys in return, I mean, we didn't trade Isaiah Livers and Marvin Bagley to get those guys in return. We got that to clear up cap space, right? So I think a move like that you make not to get a good player in return to help your franchise up, but instead do the financial piece that you have to do for the summer. So that was what I thought. And yes, to your point, is this the first of many moves? Yes, I think so. I think this is the one thing that you have to do to get the ball rolling. Yep. And now they're in a position to maybe do even a bigger trade. Now, will do a third trade before the deadline? I don't think so. I think there's just going to be one more big one, or one more bigger one and one smaller one of the same maybe capacity, as we just saw with Livers and Bagley. But yeah, it was exciting. Of course, I know that Livers was a guy we liked, had potential, obviously a fellow Michigander. Played good ball with Michigan and had some good rookie stints. But the importance is the important part is he wasn't really a core piece. Same with Bagley. Good players with good potential, but really not about a core, your core. And when you have a team that has only won 3 games up to that point, and it's mid-January, you really have to just stick with your core that's untradeable and try to get other players that can help your core. Because again, you're trying to win basketball games. We've given Livers some minutes. Could we give him more here and there? Sure. Bagley, same deal. But the truth is they just weren't a part of this future long-term. We appreciate their time in Detroit, but you have to move on from players who don't help you get the W in the win column. And that just wasn't, they weren't the core, Sean.
when going into, before today, when they were 3-36, you're bound to make a change, right? Like
yes,
that has to happen. And Isaiah Livers is, he kind of turned out to be a better idea than he was a basketball player in actuality. I think we all really liked Isaiah Livers, the person, and Isaiah Livers, the prospect, and especially the archetype of what, Isaiah Livers could bring, especially with his, with what you saw in his college career. You saw, like his development, even some of the flashes he had in his rookie season when he was able to actually stay healthy. Like there were moments where you could say, okay, Isaiah Livers actually looks like he could be a pretty good basketball player. He couldn't hit shots, and he couldn't stay on the court consistently. And when he did, he couldn't hit shots. And when you can't make a shot, it's like, especially when you're a 3-and-D wing, and you can't do the 3, and consequently you're not that great at the D. Then like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? Whereas with Marvin Bagley, I think you look at that situation and it's kind of a little bit more tough because I would say if you were to look at like what you can really criticize the front office of the Detroit Pistons for, I think you kind of look no further than the Marvin Bagley situation as a microcosm of it, in the sense that you traded second round picks to acquire Marvin Bagley. You traded 2 second round picks to acquire him. And on top of that, you also traded players who consequentially, I mean, ended up being better than Marvin Bagley was for the Pistons. I mean, Trey Lyles,
Trey Lyles,
when
yeah.
he went to Sacramento, he was very productive for them and contributed in a short playoff run for them. You even look at a guy who was also included in the deal, like a Dante DiVincenzo, who was also moved to Sacramento as part of this transaction as well. I mean, I mean, ultimately, you understand from the Pistons' perspective of taking the swing on a guy who's like a former number 2 overall pick. Especially at the time, the Pistons didn't have a lot of athleticism or vertical spacing, but it was the second that they drafted Jalen Duren, and you saw like what he was like on the court day one, where it essentially muted like everything that made Marvin Bagley like advantageous for the Pistons. You know what I mean? Because it's like Jalen Duren could immediately come in and do everything that Bagley could do just as well, if not better, except they weren't paying him $12.5 million a year.
Mhm.
Right. And so the tricky thing is you gave up those 2 second round picks to acquire Marvin Bagley. And then because of the contract that you ultimately signed him to and the salary that he has attached to him, you had to give up 2 second round picks to move off of him. Now, obviously, this allows the Pistons to acquire, like this gives them more cap space, upwards of like $60 million in the offseason, which is a huge thing. I also think it's something that they can use, like preemptively, like going into the offseason. Like I think a lot of times, like, free agency is, I think kind of a myth. I think you kind of look at what's called pre-agency, where you
Mm.
kind of, go and get your players in the trade market and then sign them to extensions, like with an understanding that you're going to extend them bringing in. That's pretty much what New York did with OG Anunoby. And, kind of understanding and, like hearing from other beat writers, it sounds like the way that a higher ranking source described this trade for the Pistons was the first step. And, like in all things considered, it definitely feels like the first step in whatever their plan is. And I mean, listen, like whatever their like and like the whatever plan A was of like, this restoration failed, right?
Yeah.
Like it is flat out failed. And so now I think, like I did a pod with, Omari Sankofa last week. Yeah, if you haven't seen that, go check it out on the channel. We talked about how, like they have to do a full autopsy of, of what went wrong. And like where things went south. And, I think moving from, a guy like a Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Livers very much signals to the fact of, they're not resting on their laurels. Like they are actively looking to make changes. The interesting thing though, and I'm interested what your thoughts are on this, Troy. Gallinari and Muscala, one thing that I was kind of curious of when they were brought in, like one thing that was announced after this was it creates, in the offseason, it creates like about like $5 million in cap space for Detroit for like a trade exception. But consequentially, now Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala can't be included in any deals leading up to the deadline and essentially are here through the season. And yes, it gives us expiring contracts, gives us that cap space. But on the other hand, wouldn't it have been nice to be able to bundle those guys into potential deal to get someone else who could maybe help us now?
Yeah, yeah. I definitely saw that too, Sean. And I think with that though, I mean, these are kind of players, and we saw even in the beginning steps of the rebuild, you kind of have to throw sometimes expiring contracts on the court.
Mhm.
And I feel like with our record, Sean, that's not going to be the end of the world. Sure, you want to see younger guys develop. Sure, you want to
Right.
see put as much as our core on the court as possible, but you still need a second unit. And if you can have an expiring contract or two on the second unit, that's good. But like you said, the most important part about what you said, Sean, is when you understand and come to the conclusion that your step A or your plan A failed in your original attempt for a rebuild or a restoration, you need to then go back and have a different tweaks of your plan A. And again, a part of our plan A that very first year was to throw a bunch of expiring contracts on the court, like Mason Plumlee, right? And then play your rookies when they earn minutes, right? And to have these veterans on the court and being competitive in practice and in the games with your rookies and your younger players. So
well, and it's not having the expiring contracts isn't like a bad thing. It's not necessarily saying like that's a problem at all. I mean, and like and watching, from their careers, like, Dio Gallinari, for example, he's 35 now. He's coming off of an ACL injury. I know he's not quite the same player that he was, back when he was like one of the, low key, one of the best scoring like wings in the league. Like there were stretches where, Danilo Gallinari was, just flat out dominant. Now, like obviously I don't think he's going to be that, but at the very least, what, what Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari, what they do bring is spacing. Guys who can shoot the basketball at least to some level, but also, kind of that veteran presence. I guess it's just kind of more so wondering of, could those have been used better as contracts to flip? But at the same light, I mean, they were on the Wizards for a reason, right? So, I think, and with Marvin Bagley, I think he, for all intents and purposes, he was who he was, right? Like I think he's gotten to the point where we know or at least we knew what to expect out of him. And not that there isn't like a good player in there, but definitely not the type of player that Detroit is in need of. And on top of that, just not the skill set that fits the modern NBA. I think I think he can come off the bench and be a solid scoring big for a lot of teams, but he's not really great at rebounding. He's not really great at defending, which are two of the most important jobs that a big has. And so, when you're not getting much playing time over James Wiseman, I think for all intents and purposes, like the writing's on the wall.
That's another guy, Sean, that I think is going to be really interesting in the next weeks to come. Or if he stays on this roster to the end of the year, minutes with him is going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think, I think him and Killian Hayes both are just guys that I'm just fascinated to see, like what ultimately they decide, because they're both players that are like coming up on expiring deals themselves. There's kind of the looming, like possibility of what's going to happen in their future with James Wiseman. I mean, for right now, I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's kind of not a whole lot of, reason to like, to worry at the moment, just because I don't know how much Mike Muscala is actually going to come in and take over, like minutes, for that backup big role. But in the same light, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, if Wiseman was packaged in a deal of some form. I mean, when you're at this level of losing, and like you've kind of had this type of season, I think the trade signals today, like if anything, or like over this weekend, I think if it signals anything, it's that like, pretty much anyone's up for grabs, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Right. And not just on our team, Sean, but in the league, anyone's up for grabs. I mean, last year, kind of to change the subject a little bit, but Kevin Durant got traded at the deadline. You know what I mean? So with that being said, I think we're going to see even a bigger active deadline than even last year. And as a fan of the league, of course, Pistons come first and foremost to our hearts. But a fan of the league, we might see some serious things being shaken up, because the league's full of depth that when you are a fifth or a sixth or a seventh seed in your respective conference, East or West, you have, the margin for error is inches, right? So you have to become better than your competitor by a small margin. And the trade deadline is a great opportunity to make your team just a little bit better. So,
and on top of that, I think you're just having a lot of teams, coming to grips with who they are, right? Like what they, like ultimately, like what they, and more importantly, like teams coming to graps with what they aren't, right? Like a team that we were, like really high on earlier in the season, they were like the second seed early on, Orlando. They kind of fell down to 21-18, kind of fell down to earth a little bit. So before you kind of thought they could maybe be a little bit more aggressive. Now they're kind of what they thought they would be. But like you look at teams like, I look at the Atlanta Hawks, who are 15-23. They're spiraling. They just got beat really badly by, funny enough, the Washington Wizards at home the other day. All reports suggest that DeJounte Murray is going to be traded come the trade deadline. And the latest reports say that pretty much anyone not named Jalen Johnson and Trae Young are available for trade reports. I don't know if Atlanta's in love with Trae Young enough for him to concretely be on the no trade list. But I mean, Troy, I mean, like, that's just an example. I mean, another team, the Warriors, anyone not named Steph Curry is available for trade.
Which is exciting if you're a Warriors fan, because I think with the right trade, you might be able to put a competitive roster around Steph in the West.
I mean, but the tricky thing is with the way that they've set themselves up, like with like salary cap wise, kind of like some of the, really the only moves they have to make are giving up guys like, like Jonathan Kuminga, guys like Moses Moody, and like Draymond's contract isn't going to be super easy to move either. And then you have Clay, who is an expiring deal, but it's going to be interesting. A guy who's been linked with them, but also the Pacers, is Pascal Siakam. If Pascal Siakam somehow ended up in Golden State, that would be bizarre. Him and Steph Curry in the pick and roll together,
kind of gives me. I don't know if that gives me chills, goosebumps, what I'm feeling right now, but that would be an interesting thing to see, wouldn't it?
Something's happening in your pants. You just don't want to rip down the zipper to see what it is. Oh, that's like Pandora's box you don't want to open. Pandora, right. Yeah, Pandora's underwear. Anyway, but Troy, I mean, in all seriousness though, like, you know what else is a surreal thing, and you look at teams that are going to make trades or have to do something at the deadline. You know what teams have the same amount of wins since December 30th?
Who is Sean?
The Detroit Pistons at 2. Another team that only has 2 wins since that point, the Los Angeles Lakers. And that's a team that has Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Austin Reeves. Like, this was supposed to be, like after last year, after the Western Conference Finals run, everyone thought, they assumed, oh, well, if LeBron and Anthony Davis just stay healthy, they're going to get right back there.
Well, but Troy, what we really saw, Sean, last year was their peak.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because you even look at like teams around the West right now, Troy, I don't even know if I'd take the Lakers over the Jazz, which, by the way, look out for the Utah Jazz. This team came out as one of the worst teams in the league to start the season. Over the last month, they're like just over 500. Like, after October, they were projected to only win 19 games on the season.
Mm-hmm.
They have 21 right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of that, I mean, actually, most of that has to do with the play of Lauri Markkanen. I mean, he's a guy that really has expanded this role, and he was kind of in some ways, a throw-in player to a degree with that Donovan Mitchell trade with Cleveland.
No, he's a throw-in player. The headline of that trade was supposed to be Colin Sexton.
Sexton was your main piece, right. So you throw Markkanen in there. And yeah, he's developing as by far the best player on their team. And of course, you have a Walker Kessler, who's a rising star, you could say, behind him as a big, played for Team USA this summer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they have a lot of great pieces, but now they have to realize they're building this franchise around Markkanen. But then you even have a guy like Sexton, who maybe was your big piece, but he's still playing good basketball.
Yeah,
it's not as good as, of course, a Markkanen, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think a really underrated aspect for the Utah Jazz is, is having Will Hardy, like one of, if not the youngest coach in basketball. As solid as he has been for them and just the culture that they're building, I'm interested to see, because they could really play it patient, but like at the same time, like, who's to say in a year or two when one of these big stars become available for trade next? I mean, Utah has just as much stock or trade assets in their cabinets as anybody, including Oklahoma City. So who's to say that, they can't be a big player at some point? So, definitely exciting to see what they're doing, because especially everyone thought they were going to be sellers at the deadline. Like, people were talking about, like, them moving Lauri Markkanen and going in a different direction, but like, who's to say they wouldn't want to go and add alongside Lauri Markkanen
right. I mean, that's the type of basketball he's playing. I mean, he's playing kind of, do I dare say it, franchise level play, right? And when you're doing that kind of basketball, Sean, your natural first thought as a GM should be, okay, what kind of pieces can I put around him, especially since they're actually winning basketball games? and
Yeah.
they're playing competitively. And now that of course, the past few years that the NBA has expanded the play-in tournament as the means to get into the playoffs, you want players that can push you over that play-in hump.
Yep.
And I think, yeah, the deadline is going to be exciting to see if they do any moves because they have all the reasons to.
Mm-hmm. If the play-in tournament were to start today, Troy, in the Western Conference, the 4 teams in would be the Dallas Mavericks, the Phoenix Suns, the Utah Jazz, and the Houston Rockets.
Yeah.
Sitting right on the outside at 11 and 12, the Los Angeles Lakers
Yeah.
and the Golden State Warriors.
Ah.
So if that doesn't tell you that they have reason to go out and make some moves and really change around, like the fabric of their roster, like, I don't know what does. And then on the East side, you look at who makes the play-in tournament as of today. Indiana's right on that bubble. They're at 6. So as of today, they would technically, they would technically be safe, but it would be the New York Knicks, who they could be aggressive, go make some moves. They would be an interesting Bojan Bogdanovic team to me.
Oh yeah.
I look at the Orlando Magic at 8th, the Chicago Bulls at 9th, which Kobe White's been awesome, but they still need to decide what they're doing. I have some other Bulls stuff I want to talk about in a minute that doesn't quite have full to do with basketball. We'll get to that in a second. But the 10th place team, the Brooklyn Nets. So that means sitting right on the outside in the East is the Atlanta Hawks at 11 and the Toronto Raptors at 12, which are both teams that I think are looking to be sellers. So now you're seeing I think you're starting to see a much clearer picture of a lot of teams that are kind of in the middle of the pack or just below where they want to be, figuring out who they are and realizing they need to make moves. And I think that's why you're like, I don't think you're going to see a Kevin Durant type name be moved at this year's deadline, but I think you're going to see more movement than you've seen in previous years, because I think you're seeing a lot of teams not complacent with where they are. And you're finally seeing some teams finally decide to blow it up, because you had so many teams that were trying to push for the play-in. Not everyone can make it. You know what I mean? Not everyone's good enough. And I think you're starting to see teams finally come to grips with who they are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And a team that you said that I just can't stop thinking about is Brooklyn, because they have, you said it as a seller team, they have pieces that they can move. They have pieces. And I think not a lot of teams have the luxury as a Brooklyn, where sure, they may be in basketball purgatory. I'm still not 100% sure their direction, but this deadline could be an opportunity to prove your direction, whatever direction that may be. Do you think Bridges is truly a franchise player you want to build around? Do you want to blow it up completely? Do you just want to do one tiny move because you think this team can make a run in the playoffs? I don't know what their management's thinking, but I'm very curious to see what's going to go on there. But not just in the East, Sean. What about the West with Phoenix? Not what's going on there. They've been struggling of late.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, Phoenix, I think they've only had like 2 games all year where Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal have all been on the court together at the same time. The big thing there is they just can't really stay healthy. I saw reports that they want to add a wing at the deadline, which is like, hey, that's great. But what do they have to trade? What room do they have to to acquire any salary cap? Like, they're just in a position where they have no flexibility whatsoever. And, if you're telling me that today, this team's going to be, in the play-in tournament, that kind of scares me a little bit, because, not only does that mean that it's like single elimination at that point, a lot of things can happen, pretty much anything goes. Well, that means in the first round, that means you're going to have to you're more than likely going to have to go to Minnesota, Oklahoma City, or Denver. And the way all those teams are playing right now, I would not want to face any of them in the first round. So when I look at a team that's kind of like an all-time, like, what do they do? I think it's, I think it's Phoenix. It's like one of those trades where I think the Kevin Durant trade peaked at the breaking news tweet. And then the second it started to fall apart was when you saw everything that they gave up in order to go get him. Because don't get me wrong, if you have an opportunity to go get Kevin Durant, 9 times out of 10, you take that opportunity. but Phoenix took the 1 time out of 10 where they quite literally emptied all the cupboards. You know what I mean? It's like they gave up everything in their house to, get this to get this one package of noodles. And then they
Right.
forgot that they actually needed a pot and pan to cook the noodles.
Right. That's a great analogy. I like that a lot. And that's difficult to say because the noodles are good. The Kevin Durant play that you're getting
There is juice
good.
to the squeeze. Yeah, that is some primo pasta. But if you don't have a fork and you're just eating it out of your hands, then how the is that any good?
Kevin Durant is playing great basketball, but it's hard. It's hard for the team too. So I'm very curious to see because again, okay, you want a wing. You said you have two. I mean, if you're going to argue Booker's a wing-ish, shooting guard, whatever, but you have KD, Beal, and Booker. You
right.
might have
I think it would really be like a
Beal.
defensive wing that can take the pressure off of those guys on that end of the court. But again, that's a hot commodity and a luxury. Maybe you could call Brooklyn back and see if there's some form of maneuvering you can make there. I don't know if they're going to be super just interested in making moves with you. And even then, Phoenix just doesn't have anything that they can offer in a trade. So
like you would want ideally a Cam Johnson even back, right? I mean, of course you'd want Bridges.
Well, that ain't. Yeah, I mean, at this point,
happening, I don't think.
At this point, I think they'd have to be coming and begging for like a Royce O'Neal or or a Dorian Finney-Smith would be really their best case scenario. Yeah. Which I mean, you really look like I know people look at the big names in Brooklyn, but I mean, they have solid rotation players like available. Like Royce O'Neal is a guy that could help quite a few rotations, including, in my opinion, the Pistons. Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that I've been clamoring for Detroit to try and trade for just because he's another one of those defensive wings, like, a ball stopper, a guy who can, really cause a lot of issues. And also he's pretty good at shooting the three as well, like pretty underrated in that category. So, there's going to be a lot of players available, a lot of movement that's about to go down. And, I'm fascinated with what's about to happen. Troy, one thing that we didn't touch on with the Pistons that we kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, but there was, I'm not sure how much you've seen about this, but after the Spurs game, I'm sorry, not the Spurs game, the Rockets game on Friday at home, Monty was asked about, just kind of why Jaden Ivey hasn't really been used a lot at the one and why he hasn't really had the ball in his hands a whole lot. And he was asked about it, and he said that we had a big meeting yesterday as an organization, and we looked at the numbers, all of our players from a roster analysis standpoint, and that's the one thing I haven't tried this year that everyone was somewhat curious about. I had to eat it. I was like, well, I haven't done it, and I've got to at least give him a shot. I fell into it tonight and kind of kicked myself for not doing it earlier because he had a long stretch where he was out for a while. But it's something that came up yesterday at our meetings to try to put J.I. more of a facilitating position on the top of the key and let him play pick and roll. Now, obviously, this caused a lot of uproar because people heard this and you're like, it had to be pointed out to you to have Jaden Ivey get the ball in his hands and run the offense. And I think there's a lot of criticism, or I think there's a lot of fair criticism in that. And I think there's some validity in that. I would also say, I would also give Monty props for admitting when he's wrong and admitting the fault of not doing that. But at the same time, I mean, if you look at like a lot of the reasons why the Pistons have struggled this season, a big portion of that you can look at the lack of utilizing Jaden Ivey. And, even just in the last couple of games, just obviously it's not a positive when Cade Cunningham goes out to injury, but if there's any silver lining, and it's that they've been forced to have to put the ball back in Jaden Ivey's hands. I mean, Troy, it's apparent that like this offense and Jaden Ivey himself is just much more dynamic with the ball in his hands. And if you're going to make the Cade and Ivey backcourt work, you need to have actions where they're both running the offense.
Right. Ivey, we know from college too, is a score first guard, right? A shoot first guard, a guy who does better with the ball in his hands. And we've seen
him play make too, though.
What'd you say? Play make.
He can play make too, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, he can play make. Absolutely. And I think even when you have a guy like Durant, to your point, I mean, he helps you play make, right? And having some shooters in the corner, and when Cade and him are on the court at the same time, I view that as a good thing, right? Because both can play make and both can score. And for a defense to have to have game plans against that and to try to run schemes to stop that can be a tough thing, especially when you have a guy like Duren. Now, may sound silly to say because of the Pistons with such a poor record this year, but that is a dangerous combo to have in the NBA. Playmaking, score first guards who have a big man who can play good D and catch lobs and score in the paint as well. But it's about utilizing what you have on this roster. And shooters too are big, but we have a Bojan. We have an Alec Burks. We saw Alec Burks get some buckets here today with our win against the Wizards. We've seen Alec Burks get buckets all year. So yeah, I think that utilizing the two are important, especially Ivy's skills. And it is slightly concerning that first part of what Monty said about, well, he didn't really realize this to its full capacity when us Pistons fans are like, look at what's at your table. Look what's at your feet.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know, Sean. I just, Monty has some things to blame, but not all of it, as some Pistons fans on X want to say. So I just, It's such a hard place to be in. But what I hope we can agree on is the Pistons are better when the ball's in Jaden Ivey's hands. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the win that they had as recorded today, he had 24 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. He did have 5 turnovers, and I mean that is the one thing. And I mean, granted, he's a young guard. It's his second year in the league. He's on an insanely young roster that still struggles with spacing, but nonetheless, his athleticism and just the amount of different things he can do once he does have the ball in his hands. He's a lot more dynamic when he's allowed to actually run actions, when he has more sets, when he is at the top of the key. Because when you just have that type of player just sitting in the corner, and when you're not allowing, like a player with his skill set to really utilize what he can do and really drive to the basket and cause some havoc, I think those are the types of things that are only going to open up more opportunities for guys like Cade Cunningham as well. And I think another positive of the transaction that just took place as of right now is it gives more space for guys like Assar Thompson to come in and get more minutes when, quite frankly, I don't think Isaiah Livers quite deserved those. So
yeah, that's another big thing that I failed to mention in your very first question of what I think about the trade. Well, this frees up Assar Thompson. I said the core, and I guess I would call him, the core as a rookie.
Oh, he's definitely part of the core, 100%.
Well, we've seen on both sides of the court this season with him. But yes, this makes him a better player to have on your roster and to give more minutes to. So,
yeah, 100%. So obviously, it's still difficult to to kind of grade the trade and just kind of everything as of right now, because it still feels like the picture is incomplete, right? But ultimately, at the very least, I think everyone can agree that at least change of some form is coming. And I think it's obviously it's a good thing that the Pistons have as much cap space as they do. But again, as we've seen in the past and as we see in the present, cap space is only what you make with it, right? I think at this point, if you look at what the Pistons are trying to replicate, what direction they're trying to head in, you're like, what type of team are we trying to be? It's pretty clear that they're trying to follow the roadmap of the Houston Rockets, right? Like a team that was able to, get cap space, was able to add on to the young talent that they had, go get Fred VanVleet, go get Dylan Brooks, and fortify what you have in house with those pieces that you had in the front office. And the amount of times that actually works is not always high. But I think if anything, and obviously I know from the outside looking in perspective, it can be crazy to look at a team that's giving up picks, in trades when they've only won at this point 4 games in the season. But in the same light, when you have players like Cade Cunningham, like Jaden Ivey, when you actually have those types of young players that actually have an upside, you can't allow the level of losing that's been happening to continue, especially when there's a lot to actually, to a lot of potential that you can actually realize. with what you have in house. So, I mean, the sooner they can get this turned around, simply the better. And, definitely think this is a good first step.
Me too. Me too.
Now, Troy, did you see what happened in Chicago over the weekend with the Bulls Ring of Honor ceremony?
Yeah, the Last Dance, which we all loved, came to have a big curse over the game.
So for those that are not aware, over the weekend, the Chicago Bulls hosted a Ring of Honor ceremony in honor of the some of the greats in the history of the franchise. Ring of Honor, pretty common thing that we see throughout sports. The Bulls obviously have had their fair share of not great seasons and mediocrity. So this is a great way to to bring back fans and celebrate the history in the tutelage that they do have. Well, it was a great idea until they ultimately started to boo the widow of Jerry Krause. And specifically it started with them booing the late Jerry Krause, but then as you can see as the booing went on and things like that, you could just tell that that she was emotional, that it was difficult for her to deal with. And I mean, Troy, people can have, like their opinions of Jerry Krause, the person, or Jerry Krause, the general manager. Just a bad look. And I don't really know how booing someone's wife, let alone just booing someone who's passed away and also won your franchise 6 championships with the team that he constructed. And look, I get it, because The Last Dance did not paint him in the best light. And if you're looking at him as solely the character that you learned from The Last Dance, I get that perspective. But Troy, I have a feeling these documentaries are going to start doing more harm than they're doing good, especially when the subjects of these documentaries now all have the editing access. I mean, this is what it is, right? I mean, Michael Jordan, he had the final say of what was in that documentary, and with the way Jerry Krause is treated in it, it shows.
Right. Yeah. And I think what's interesting, I mean, you brought it up already, the 6 championships. Now, I'm not a Bulls fan. Of course, I'm a Pistons fan. I'm the opposite of a Bulls fan. But with that being said, how many championships have they won since Krause left? Right? I mean,
Granted, that's how many they've won since Jordan left too, but I mean,
Right.
it's ultimately the point, right? There's no like they both needed each other.
But I think what you put on Twitter, I think, or maybe what you reposted was something along the lines of, Michael Jordan should be held accountable to some degree, right? One, he wasn't
holds
even
responsibility in this.
He wasn't even there. But 2, with him being the GOAT, he has the, I guess, role model status, that people are going to take what he says as truth no matter what. And if that's the picture he paints, that's the picture he paints. But I assume there's always 2 sides to every story. And when you have a figure like Michael Jordan, right, this godlike figure, and he has a documentary that's being, broadcasted and advertised as the degree that The Last Dance was during COVID, you're going to take what this godlike figure has to say.
Right.
And like you already brought up, he didn't have kind things to say.
Well, and if you look at the messaging of The Last Dance, like there's maybe a minute where they talk about how, the construction of the roster and how it was a great basketball team that was assembled. But really, even years after Jerry Krause's passing, this was still like a documentary that was very much, like for all intents and purposes, it was directed to, very much be mean in its intent. So it's like, it almost comes off as, like a form of bullying in that sense, right? And so obviously it's one of those things where, it happened. You can't go back and change it. This isn't all the Bulls fans either. These are the people in the arena that decided to do it. However, it was a disturbingly loud uproar, and just for a lack of better terms, it just felt like a black eye on what was supposed to be, a celebration of, like one of the greatest dynasties in the history of professional sports. But on top of that, I mean, it's just an ugly story for the league.
Right. Yeah. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure you have. Sean, how about those faithful, intelligent Bulls fans? What are they saying? Do you know?
I think, I think there's a lot of mixed reaction, and I think a lot of it, comes down to, just kind of like some of it is just kind of blaming, like Michael Jordan, or saying that he does have some of a role in it. But on top of that, I think a lot of the people in Chicago are trying to defend it by saying that he was booed while he was alive as well. And it's like, well, I get that. I get that someone might not be liked, and I get that someone, earns like a certain reputation, but it's like, these are sports at the end of the day.
Right.
You know what I mean? And, obviously, there's just, to me, especially once you see that the wife is on the screen as
elderly.
well, there's just, you'd hope a level of humanity would kick in at a certain point somewhere along the line. And just the fact that it wasn't even there a little bit is just pretty sad. But I mean, ultimately the thing that was not good for Chicago was one of the people that stayed out during that celebration and did not go in the locker room was Steve Kerr of the Warriors. And then the Warriors proceeded, I believe they scored 50 points in the third quarter. So I think they motivated the wrong person. Karma pretty right there. So, and Steve Kerr was not happy after the game either, which, rightfully so. One of the Bulls announcers called it the worst thing they had ever seen in their entire life.
Wow.
So
I guess with the video I saw, you could hear the booing, but you didn't. I guess you could only feel you could really feel it, the booing, if you were only in the arena, right? I think that might be the difference. So.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. Another pretty cool thing that happened. One last thing we could talk about before the pod wraps up here, but the Miami Heat over the weekend honored their greatest player in franchise history, Dwayne Wade. And not only that, Troy, but I'm not sure if you saw, they surprised him upon his return with an announcement that they are going to be building a statue.
Oh wow, I didn't see that part. Yeah,
to honor Dwayne Wade, which, I mean, if you think of players around the league that are deserving of a statue, there's only very few in the history of the league, and he certainly meets that criteria, Troy. He is the Miami Heat, and the Miami Heat are Dwayne Wade.
Yeah. That's such a great way to put it, because he's a guy that, a little bit undersized, but my goodness, he played big, right? And you think of that 2006 run over our Pistons in the Eastern Conference Championship, to then go down 0-2 right off the bat to the Mavs, and then to come back to win 4 straight. I know he had Shaq's help, but my goodness,
I mean,
the real MVP in that, right?
He had Shaq's help, but he was the real star in that series. I mean, that was a year 3 Dwayne Wade, and just like the emergence of a star that we saw. And it's like, he legitimately, especially at his peak, like, you would have to have the conversation of, is he one of the greatest shooting guards of all time? And, obviously it was difficult because he played, also like during the midst of like the prime of Kobe, but like when those guys were like at their peaks, like they were not far off from each other at all.
Right.
And, and obviously for Dwayne Wade to help bring, LeBron and Chris Bosh to Miami, and to, win those other 2 rings as well, to, have that great relationship with Pat Riley. I mean, Dwayne Wade isn't just one of the best players in the history of basketball. He just, he seems like one of the best people as well. So definitely more than deserving. But on top of that, I mean, speaks a lot to how much, even though they, a lot of like the success that they built was, like because of him. I mean, it speaks a lot how much, just how great of an organization it is, how much success they've had without Dwayne Wade. It's not, a lot of franchises, when they lose that star player, like even Cleveland, even though they have Donovan Mitchell and they're still like, pretty good right now, a lot of like franchises, they have to figure out who they are without that player.
Yeah, absolutely. And the longevity of his career, I think, showed a lot with that too. But yeah, that ability, you mentioned the Chris Bosh, LeBron era with Dwayne Wade, that he was still not just a contributor, but still a main factor in those championships too. I mean, sure, you have your number 1 option, but you're still that 2, and you're still that guiding force. And I don't think the Heat win those championships without a Dwayne Wade either.
Oh, without a doubt.
So, I think to play all different roles, to play the role that your organization needs you to play, from rookie year to retirement. Not many players have the one, ego to do that, but two, the skill set to truly play the role that this current roster needs you to play. And Dwayne Wade did that from rookie year to retirement. So.
Well, yep. And obviously there are there are those couple, there was the weird couple years where he was in Chicago and Cleveland and things like that. But ultimately it's just nice to see not only that rift in the relationship wasn't permanent, but on top of that, just to see a player get, the recognition that he deserves.
Yeah.
I mean, and also just how old does it make you feel that a finals that we watched as kids, now the 2-star players from those respective franchises are going to have statues. Kirk has the statue out in Dallas. Now Dwayne Wade's getting his.
Pretty special stuff. Pretty special stuff, Sean.
100%, man. Get Isaiah Thomas his statue.
You took the words right out of my mouth. My hand was rising and your mouth was moving. Put an Isaiah Thomas statue outside Little Caesars Arena, please.
Or even inside along the concourse. I mean, we have all those statues of the Red Wings greats, and I know the arena was designed, initially with, as a stadium for the Red Wings, but if there's any player of that Bad Boys team that deserves one, Isaiah Thomas is more than deserving. Yeah. He's one of the all-time greats. And on top of that, like if there is a Piston to give a statue, it's him.
It has to be. Yeah. And I think the Pistons organization are one, with the 3 championships, with the 2 with the Bad Boys, that should have some type of statue, right? I mean, Dirk won one. Dirk won one and he got a statue. So
Absolutely.
Or just put a big afro as a statue for Ben Wallace, right?
They should do the statue of Larry Brown wearing the afro. That would be such a good statue. Oh my gosh. Maybe From Half Court gets a statue at some point, Troy.
With your face on it.
Maybe you and mine both just
one of those Titanic ones we made in college.
What? Titanic?
I'll send you a pic after the pod.
Okay. I clearly forgot something in college here. But anyway, Troy, always fun to sit down and talk basketball with you. The trade deadline, especially looming, makes it even more fun as well. And with that brings a lot more, unpredictability, but also a lot more reason to click that subscribe button, because you're not going to want to miss any of the content, any of the conversations, any of the commotion, and any of the chaos. And with that, folks, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for making From Half Court a regular part of your week. And we'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.